Lieutenant Jake Morrison had survived 3 years of interstellar combat, but he'd never faced anything as terrifying as the silence that followed his mistake. It had started as a routine joint training exercise aboard the UNSC Endeavour, humanity's newest battleship. The war against the hegemony had forced humans and Zephyrians into an uneasy alliance, and these exercises were supposed to build trust between species that had been killing each other just 5 years ago. Jake was running diagnostics on the tactical display when Commander Lyrith S. entered the war room. Even after months of working alongside Zephyrians, her presence still made him pause. Standing 7 feet tall with 4 arms that moved in perfect coordination, she was built like a warrior goddess from ancient mythology. Her skin was a pale blue-silver that seemed to shimmer with inner light, and her large violet eyes held intelligence that felt almost predatory. "Status report, Lieutenant," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality that all Zephyrians possessed. The universal translator rendered her words in crisp English, though it couldn't quite capture the harmonic undertones. Jake gestured to the holographic display showing fleet positions. "All systems nominal, Commander. The formation patterns are looking really tight." That's when it happened. As he turned back toward the display, his eyes caught the way the tactical lights played across Commander Lyrith S.'s angular features, highlighting the elegant curve of her cheekbones and the way her secondary arms moved in unconscious rhythm with her speech. "Cute," he said absently, the words slipping out before his brain could stop it. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Commander Lyrith S.'s skin flared from pale blue-silver to brilliant crimson, starting at her neck and spreading across her face like liquid fire. Her 4 arms froze mid-gesture, and her violet eyes went wide with something between shock and terror. "Oh, God," Jake said, realizing what he'd done. "Commander, I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "You..." she began, then stopped, her voice catching in a way Jake had never heard from any Zephyrian. "You called me." "I was looking at the display," Jake said quickly, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew they sounded like a lie. "I meant the formation pattern was..." "No." Commander Lyrith S. stepped closer, and Jake could see that her hands were trembling. "You were looking at me." Jake felt heat rising in his own cheeks. She was right, of course. In that moment, he hadn't been thinking about tactical displays or fleet formations. He'd been thinking about how the light caught her alien features and made them beautiful in a way that defied every boundary between their species. "Commander, I apologize if I've caused offense." "Offense?" Her voice rose in pitch, carrying harmonics that made Jake's teeth ache. "Lieutenant Morrison, do you understand what you have done?" Before Jake could answer, the war room doors hissed open and Captain Richards strode in, followed by Admiral Fexfar, the Zephyrian fleet commander. The moment they saw Commander Lyrith S.'s crimson coloration, both officers stopped dead. "What in the hell happened here?" Captain Richards demanded. Admiral Fexfar was staring at his subordinate with what Jake was learning to recognize as Zephyrian shock, a subtle flattening of the skin patterns around the eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried dangerous undertones. "Commander Lyrith S., why are you displaying acceptance colors?" "Acceptance colors?" Jake asked, though a cold dread was already building in his stomach. "Lieutenant Morrison," Admiral Fexfar turned his attention to Jake, and those alien eyes seemed to look straight through him. "What exactly did you say to my commander?" Jake glanced between the 3 higher-ranking officers, all of whom were watching him with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. I called her cute." The silence that followed was deafening. Captain Richards closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. "Morrison, please tell me you were referring to the tactical display." "I was," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction even to his own ears. Admiral Fexfar's skin patterns shifted to configurations that Jake's cultural briefings had taught him meant extreme displeasure. In Zephyrian culture, Lieutenant, to call someone cute is to express romantic intent. It is the equivalent of a formal courtship declaration. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. "A what?" And when a Zephyrian displays acceptance colors in response, the Admiral continued relentlessly, it indicates they are receptive to such advances. Jake looked at Commander Lyrith S., whose crimson coloration was now so bright she seemed to glow. She was staring at the floor, all four of her hands clenched into fists. "Commander," Jake said softly, "I didn't know. I'm sorry, You cannot take it back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The words have been spoken. The colors have been displayed. According to the old laws, we are now bonded," Admiral Fexvar finished grimly. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Morrison. You have just accidentally proposed marriage to the most decorated warrior in the Zephyrian fleet." Jake stared at the alien commander, whose skin was now cycling through shades of red that his cultural briefings hadn't covered. Marriage. To an alien. To a warrior who could probably bench press a small spacecraft. "Is there any way to undo this?" Captain Richards asked. "Only through formal rejection," Admiral Fexvar replied. "Commander Lyrith S. would need to publicly declare Lieutenant Morrison unworthy of her consideration." "And if she doesn't?" Jake asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Then according to Zephyrian law, you are considered engaged. The formal bonding ceremony would be expected within one solar cycle." Jake looked at Commander Lyrith S. again. She was still staring at the floor, her skin color shifting in patterns he couldn't read. In all their months of working together, he'd never seen her look so vulnerable. "Commander," he said gently, "what do you want to do?" She looked up at him then, and Jake saw something in her violet eyes that made his breath catch. Not anger or embarrassment, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like hope. She began, then stopped. "I need time to think." "Of course," Jake said quickly. "Take all the time you need." 1 hour, Admiral Fexvar announced. "If no formal rejection is declared within 1 hour, the bonding will be considered accepted by both parties. The implications for human-Zephyrian relations." He left the thread unfinished. As the senior officers filed out, Jake found himself alone with Commander Lyrith S. She was still glowing red, still avoiding his eyes. "For what it's worth," Jake said quietly, "I really am sorry. I never meant to put you in this position." She looked at him then, and her skin patterns shifted to something softer, more complex. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said, "what if I told you that your mistake might not have been entirely unwelcome?" Jake felt his world shift on its axis. "Commander? What if I told you," she continued, her voice carrying new harmonics that made Jake's heart race, "that for months I have been wondering what it would be like if the barriers between our species mattered less." 57 minutes. Jake paced the observation deck, watching the stars whirl past the viewport while his mind raced through the implications of what had just happened. Commander Lyrith S. had retreated to her quarters to consider her options, leaving him alone with thoughts that refused to organize themselves into anything resembling sense. Engaged. To an alien. To a Zephyrian warrior who could snap him in half without breaking stride. The rational part of his brain insisted this was insane. Humans and Zephyrians had been at war for decades before the hegemony threat forced them into alliance. Even now, after years of cooperation, most interactions between their species were stiffly formal, carefully governed by diplomatic protocols designed to prevent exactly this kind of cultural mishap. But the irrational part of his brain, the part that had noticed the graceful way Commander Lyrith S. moved, the intelligence in her violet eyes, the rare moments when her stern exterior cracked to reveal something warmer underneath, that part was asking questions he'd never dared voice. "This is completely insane," he muttered to the stars. "Talking to yourself, Morrison?" Jake turned to find Lieutenant Sarachin entering the observation deck, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. As the Endeavor's xenocultural specialist, she probably knew more about Zephyrian customs than anyone else on the ship. "Sarah," Jake said, relief flooding through him. "Thank God. I need someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind." "Well, you did just accidentally propose to an alien warrior princess," she said, settling beside him at the viewport. "So your mental state is definitely questionable." "She's not a princess," Jake protested automatically. "She's a fleet commander. In Zephyrian society, military rank and noble birth are often connected, Sarah explained. Commander Lyrathas is actually from one of the oldest warrior houses on Zephyr Prime. Her full title translates roughly to She Who Commands the Storm's Edge, Daughter of the Crimson Tide, Heir to the Throne of Blades. Jake stared at her. Are you serious? Completely. Jake, do you realize what you've gotten yourself into? If she accepts this bonding, you won't just be marrying a random Zephyrian. You'll be marrying into their equivalent of royalty. And if she rejects it? Sarah's expression grew more serious. Rejection would be problematic. Zephyrian honor culture is complex, but calling someone cute and then having them publicly declare you unworthy would be considered a significant insult. Not just to her, but to her entire house. Jake felt his stomach drop. Meaning? Meaning it could destabilize the entire human Zephyrian alliance. Her family might demand satisfaction through combat. Other Zephyrian houses might view it as an attack on their species' dignity. So I'm damned if she accepts and damned if she doesn't. Pretty much. Sarah paused, studying Jake's expression. But there's something else you should know about Zephyrian bonding customs. What now? They don't enter into romantic partnerships lightly. Their species practices what anthropologists call consciousness bonding, a form of mental and emotional connection that goes far deeper than human marriage. If Commander Lyrathas accepts your accidental proposal, it means she genuinely believes you could be compatible on that level. Jake processed this information slowly. You're saying she might actually want this? I'm saying that if she didn't, she would have rejected you immediately. The fact that she's taking time to consider it suggests she's been thinking about you as more than just a colleague. Before Jake could respond, the observation deck's doors hissed open again. Commander Lyrathas entered, her skin now a softer shade of pink rather than the brilliant red of earlier. She moved with her usual fluid grace, but Jake could see tension in the set of her shoulders. Lieutenant Chen, she said with formal politeness. Would you excuse us? Lieutenant Morrison and I need to discuss this matter privately. Sarah squeezed Jake's shoulder as she passed. Good luck, she whispered. When they were alone, Commander Lyrathas moved to stand beside Jake at the viewport. For a long moment, they watched the stars in silence. I have been thinking, she said finally, about what you said earlier. About not meaning to put me in this position. Commander, I really didn't. Please, let me finish. Her voice carried subtle harmonics that Jake was learning to recognize as nervousness. For the past several months, I have found myself curious about human culture. About human emotions. About you specifically. Jake felt his heart rate spike. About me? You are different from other humans I have encountered. Less formal. More genuine in your reactions. She paused, her skin patterns shifting to configurations Jake couldn't read. When you work, you become completely absorbed in the task. You forget to maintain the careful diplomatic distance that usually exists between our species. Is that good or bad? It is refreshing. She turned to face him fully, and Jake saw vulnerability in her alien features that took his breath away. Jake, may I call you Jake? Of course. Jake, what I am about to tell you must remain between us unless I formally accept the bonding. I understand. Commander Lyrathas took a deep breath, her four hands clasping and unclasping nervously. In Zephyrian culture, we believe that consciousness recognizes its complement across any barrier. That true compatibility transcends species, social status, or physical form. That's beautiful, Jake said softly. It is also terrifying, she admitted. Because I have felt that recognition when I look at you. The way you think, the way you approach problems, the way you treat others regardless of their species, it resonates with something deep in my consciousness. Jake stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Lyra. But there are complications beyond my personal feelings, she continued. Political implications. Cultural barriers. The simple fact that our physiology is different enough that a true bonding might be impossible. What do you mean? Zephyrian consciousness bonding involves a degree of mental connection that humans may not be capable of achieving. Without that connection, a formal bonding would be incomplete, unsatisfying for both parties. Jake felt pieces clicking together in his mind. That's why you need time to decide. You're not just considering whether you want this, you're trying to figure out if it's even possible. Yes. She moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the complex patterns of light flowing beneath her translucent skin. Jake, if I accept this bonding, I will be asking you to attempt something that has never been tried between our species. The risks are unknown. What kind of risks? Mental disorientation. Personality changes. In extreme cases, consciousness fragmentation. Her violet eyes met his. But if it works? If it works? If it works, we would share a connection deeper than anything either of our species typically experiences. Shared thoughts, emotions, even sensory input to some degree. Jake considered this, trying to imagine what it would feel like to share consciousness with another being. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. How much time do we have left? He asked. Commander Lyrathess checked her chronometer. 37 minutes. And if you accept? Then we begin the preliminary bonding rituals immediately. The formal ceremony would take place within the solar cycle, as Admiral Thexfar mentioned. Jake looked out at the stars, then back at the alien woman who had just admitted she felt a connection with him that transcended species barriers. Lyra, he said softly, what do you want me to say? I want you to tell me honestly whether the thought of bonding with me terrifies you. Jake considered lying, considered giving her the safe answer that would preserve their professional relationship and avoid any further complications. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. Yes, he said. It terrifies me. But not for the reasons you might think. What do you mean? I'm not scared of the mental connection, or the physical differences, or even the political implications. Jake took a deep breath. I'm scared because I think I might actually want this, and I don't know what that says about me. Commander Lyrathess's skin flared a soft, warm gold, an expression Jake had never seen before. It says, she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that made his heart race, that we may be more compatible than either of us dared hope. The timer continued counting down, and Jake realized that the next 37 minutes would determine the course of his entire life. 23 minutes. Commander Lyrathess had led Jake to her private quarters, explaining that Zephyrian bonding decisions required a space free from outside influences. Her quarters were larger than his, reflecting her higher rank, but what surprised Jake was how personal they felt. Unlike the sterile military precision he'd expected, Lyra's quarters contained what could only be described as art. Crystalline sculptures that caught and refracted light in complex patterns. Woven tapestries that seemed to shift color as he looked at them. And on her desk, a small holographic display showing what looked like a family portrait, several Zephyrians in formal dress, their skin patterns synchronized in what Jake was learning to recognize as emotional harmony. Your family, he asked. My parents and siblings, she confirmed, her voice carrying affection that the universal translator struggled to convey. They would be interested to learn about recent developments. Interested. Right. Jake tried to imagine explaining this situation to his own parents back on Earth. Hey Mom, I accidentally proposed to an alien warrior and she might say yes. That conversation would go well. Jake, Lyra said, settling onto a chair designed for Zephyrian physiology, there is something else you need to understand about our bonding customs. More complications? Information. Her skin patterns shifted to configurations that suggested nervousness. If I accept your proposal, the bonding process will involve several stages. The first is what we call consciousness recognition, a mental exercise that determines whether our minds are truly compatible. What does that involve? Meditation. Focused mental contact. Sharing of fundamental memories and emotions. She paused. It is intimate. More intimate than physical contact. Jake felt heat rising in his cheeks. You mean you'd see my thoughts? Not all of them. But yes, you would share selected memories with me, and I with you. Childhood experiences that shaped us. Moments of fear, joy, loss. The elements of consciousness that make us who we are. And if we're not compatible, then the bonding is dissolved with no loss of honor to either party. But Jake. Her violet eyes met his. If we are compatible, the connection will be permanent. Zephyrian consciousness bonds cannot be broken except by death. Jake absorbed this slowly. You're talking about a literal till death do us part situation. Yes. Which is why I must be certain before we proceed. What would make you certain? Lyra stood and moved to the viewport, her forearms moving in patterns that Jake was beginning to recognize as deep thought. There is a way to test preliminary compatibility without committing to the full bonding. A brief mental contact that would give us both a sense of what the complete connection might feel like. Is it safe? Safer than the full bonding, but not without risk. If our consciousness patterns are fundamentally incompatible, the contact could cause disorientation or temporary memory disruption. Jake joined her at the viewport, looking out at the star field while he processed what she was telling him. How long would this test take? A few minutes at most. And then we'd know? We would know. She turned to face him, and Jake saw something in her expression that made his breath catch. Jake, I must ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay. When you called me cute earlier, was it truly an accident? Were you really looking at the tactical display? Jake felt his cheeks burn. The question hung between them like a challenge, and he realized that everything depended on his answer. He could lie, make it easier for both of them to step back from this precipice. Or he could tell the truth and accept whatever consequences followed. No, he said quietly. I was looking at you. Lyra's skin flared gold again, brighter this time. Why? Because. Jake struggled to find words for something he'd barely admitted to himself. Because working with you these past months has been the best part of my assignment. Because you're brilliant and strong and completely unlike anyone I've ever met. Because when you're concentrating on a problem, you get this expression that's so intense and beautiful it makes me forget we're supposed to be different species. And when you said cute, I was thinking that the light made your features look soft. Approachable. Human, almost, but still distinctly you. Jake ran a hand through his hair. It was an inappropriate thought about a superior officer from another species, and it slipped out before I could stop it. Lyra moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the complex patterns of light flowing beneath her skin, close enough to feel the subtle warmth radiating from her body. Jake, she said softly, would you be willing to attempt the compatibility test? Now? We have 18 minutes remaining. If we are compatible, I will accept the bonding. If we are not. She left the sentence unfinished. Jake looked into her violet eyes and saw the same mixture of hope and terror that he felt in his own chest. What do I need to do? Sit with me. Focus on my voice. Allow yourself to be open to mental contact. She moved to a meditation mat in the center of the room, settling into a complex position that somehow looked graceful despite involving 4 arms. The initial contact will feel strange. Human consciousness patterns are different from ours. But if we are truly compatible, it will feel right. Jake settled across from her, trying to mirror her meditative posture with his limited human limbs. I've never done anything like this before. Neither have I. Not with a human. Her skin patterns shifted to something that looked like determination mixed with anticipation. Are you ready? Probably not, Jake said honestly. But yes. Lyra reached out with 2 of her hands, palms up. Place your hands in mine. Focus on your breathing. Think about why you want this connection. Jake placed his hands in hers, surprised by how warm her skin was, how it seemed to tingle with some form of energy. He closed his eyes and tried to focus on his breathing, but his mind kept wandering to the surreal nature of the situation. Jake, Lyra's voice seemed to come from very close and very far away simultaneously. Stop thinking about the strangeness. Think about why you're here. He tried to follow her instruction, focusing on the feelings that had led to this moment. His growing attraction to her intelligence and strength. The way she'd made him question his assumptions about what was possible between species. The simple fact that she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met, alien or otherwise. "Good," she said, though he wasn't sure if she spoke aloud or if he heard her voice in his mind. "Now open your consciousness to mine." Jake felt something shift, like a door opening in his mind that he'd never known existed. Suddenly, he wasn't just Jake Morrison sitting in an alien's quarters. He was also aware of another presence, vast, complex, utterly different from his own consciousness but somehow compatible. He breathed, and wasn't sure if the word came from his mouth or from his thoughts. Through the connection, he felt Lyra's consciousness touching his, curious, gentle, amazed. Her mental voice carried harmonics that no translator could capture, emotions that human language had no words for. "You are so bright," her thoughts whispered to his. "So chaotic and creative and alive. How do humans function with so much individual variation in your consciousness patterns?" "I don't know," he thought back. "How do Zephyrians function with so much harmony and structure? Your mind is like music made of mathematics. And yours is like starfire made of stories." The connection deepened, and Jake began to experience fragments of Lyra's memories. A childhood on a world with purple seas and silver skies. Training in warrior disciplines that required decades to master. The loneliness of command, of being the strongest person in most rooms while secretly longing for someone who could understand her complexity. In return, he felt her experiencing his memories. Growing up in the asteroid colonies. The exhilaration of his first space flight. The weight of responsibility he felt for his human crew, and the growing isolation of being the liaison between two species that barely trusted each other. "We are both lonely," her mental voice observed. "Both carrying burdens that our people do not understand." "Yes," he agreed. "But together we are less alone." The compatibility test lasted only minutes, but when it ended, Jake felt fundamentally changed. He opened his eyes to find Lyra staring at him, her skin cycling through colors he'd never seen before, complex patterns that spoke of joy and wonder and absolute certainty. "Well," he asked, though he already knew the answer from the lingering echo of their connection. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said formally, then smiled, an expression he'd never seen on a Zephyrian face before. "Jake. I formally accept your proposal of bonding." Jake felt the universe shift around him. "So we're really doing this? We are really doing this." She stood and moved to her communication console. "I must inform Admiral Fexfar of my decision. The preliminary bonding rituals will begin immediately." As she activated the communication array, Jake realized that his life had just changed forever. In less than an hour, he'd gone from accidentally insulting an alien commander to being engaged to her. But as he felt the lingering warmth of their consciousness connection, he realized something else. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of the future. Whatever came next, he wouldn't be facing it alone. The preliminary bonding ritual was unlike anything Jake had imagined. Within an hour of Lyra's acceptance, the Endeavor's main conference room had been transformed into something resembling a Zephyrian ceremonial space. Admiral Fexfar had arrived with a team of cultural specialists, while Captain Richards looked like he was questioning every decision that had led to this moment. "Lieutenant Morrison," Admiral Fexfar said formally, "you are about to participate in a ceremony that has never been attempted between our species. The risks are unknown, but the potential benefits to human-Zephyrian relations are significant." "No pressure," Jake muttered. "Considerable pressure," the Admiral replied, apparently not understanding sarcasm. "If this bonding fails spectacularly, it could set back our alliance by decades. If it succeeds..." He paused, his skin patterns shifting to something Jake couldn't interpret. "If it succeeds, you will be the first human to achieve consciousness bonding with a Zephyrian. You will literally be writing the manual for future interspecies relationships." Commander Lyra Thess entered wearing ceremonial robes that seemed to shift color with her movements. She looked stunning and alien and utterly intimidating. Jake was suddenly very aware that he was wearing his standard military uniform, which seemed woefully inadequate for the occasion. In traditional Zephyrian bonding, Admiral Thexfar explained, both parties would be from the same species, sharing similar consciousness patterns and cultural understanding. This ceremony has been adapted for the current situation. Adapted how? Jake asked. Simplified, Lyra said, moving to stand beside him. Many of the traditional elements assume shared racial memory and common cultural references. We've reduced the ceremony to its essential components. A Zephyrian cultural specialist, an elderly female with intricate silver patterns on her skin, approached carrying what looked like a crystalline headset. This is a consciousness amplifier, she explained through the universal translator. It will enhance the mental connection between the bonding partners, allowing for deeper consciousness recognition than would normally be possible between different species. Jake eyed the device nervously. Is it safe? Define safe, the specialist replied. It has never been used on a human. The neural feedback could cause anything from mild discomfort to complete consciousness fragmentation. Encouraging, Jake said dryly. Jake. Lyra placed one of her hands on his arm, and he felt a subtle tingle of mental contact through their earlier connection. If you have doubts, we can still withdraw. There would be no dishonor in recognizing the limitations of interspecies bonding. Jake looked around the room at the assembled officers, scientists, and cultural specialists. Everyone was watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to outright skepticism. This wasn't just about him and Lyra anymore, it was about proving that two species could trust each other completely. I'm ready, he said. The ceremony itself was surprisingly simple. Jake and Lyra sat facing each other while the consciousness amplifier was activated. The device created a field of energy that made the air shimmer like heat waves, and Jake felt his awareness expand beyond the boundaries of his own skull. Suddenly, he wasn't just connected to Lyra's consciousness, he was experiencing the universe through Zephyrian senses. Colors became more vivid, sounds gained harmonic dimensions he'd never noticed, and emotions took on almost physical weight. Through the amplified connection, he felt Lyra's complete mental landscape spreading before him. Her memories, fears, hopes, and dreams were laid bare, and he realized she was experiencing the same total access to his consciousness. This is terrifying, he thought to her. And wonderful, she replied, her mental voice carrying harmonics of joy and amazement. Your mind is so different from ours. So individual, so creative. You think in patterns we never considered possible. And yours is so structured, so harmonious. Like a symphony where every note has perfect meaning. The bonding deepened, and Jake began to understand what Lyra had meant about permanent connection. Their consciousness patterns were intertwining, creating feedback loops that strengthened with each mental exchange. He could feel her emotions as if they were his own, and knew she was experiencing the same phenomenon. We fit, she observed with wonder. Despite every biological and cultural difference, our consciousness patterns complement each other perfectly. Like two pieces of a puzzle that weren't supposed to go together but somehow do, Jake agreed. But as the connection stabilized, Jake became aware of something else, a presence watching their bonding from outside. Through Lyra's enhanced senses, he detected another consciousness, one that felt cold and hostile and utterly alien. Lyra, he thought urgently, there's something else here. I feel it too, she replied, her mental voice taking on protective harmonics. Something is monitoring our bonding. The presence pressed closer, and Jake felt a wave of malevolent curiosity. Whatever was watching them, it was learning from their connection, studying the process of human Zephyrian consciousness bonding with predatory interest. Hegemony, Lyra identified, her mental voice sharp with alarm. A hegemony consciousness probe. They're monitoring our alliance activities. Through their amplified connection, Jake understood the implications immediately. The hegemony, the collective enemy that had forced humans and Zephyrians into alliance, had developed the ability to observe consciousness bonding from a distance. They were learning how to disrupt the growing trust between formerly hostile species. Can they break our bond? Jake asked. They can try, Lyra replied, and Jake felt her warrior instincts engaging. But they would have to understand it first. The hegemony probe pressed deeper into their connection, and Jake felt its alien hunger for knowledge. But something unexpected happened. Instead of learning how to disrupt their bond, the probe began to be affected by it. Through their amplified consciousness link, Jake and Lyra were projecting something the hegemony had never encountered: voluntary connection between different species. The probe had been designed to monitor coercive collective consciousness, not the chaotic harmony of chosen bonding. It's confused, Jake realized. The probe doesn't understand what we're doing because it doesn't understand choice. Then let's show it what choice means, Lyra said grimly. Together, they turned their amplified consciousness toward the probe, not attacking it but simply being themselves, two utterly different beings who had chosen to connect across every barrier their species had ever erected. The effect on the probe was immediate and catastrophic. Designed to observe forced collective consciousness, it couldn't process the concept of voluntary individual connection. The contradiction created feedback loops that overloaded its monitoring systems. With a sensation like psychic static, the probe withdrew, carrying with it corrupted data that would make no sense to its hegemony controllers. We did it, Jake thought as the consciousness amplifier powered down. We actually drove off a hegemony probe. More than that, Lyra replied, her mental voice still clear despite the reduced connection. We proved that voluntary bonding creates something they cannot understand or counter. As Jake opened his eyes and returned to normal awareness, he realized that the ceremony had changed more than just his relationship with Lyra. It had demonstrated that human Zephyrian cooperation could create capabilities that neither species possessed alone. Admiral Fexfar was studying sensor readings with obvious amazement. Fascinating, he said. The consciousness bonding created resonance patterns that were completely undetectable to hegemony monitoring systems. What does that mean? Captain Richards asked. It means, Lyra said, standing and helping Jake to his feet, that bonded human Zephyrian pairs might be immune to hegemony consciousness manipulation. Jake felt the implications hitting him like a physical blow. You're saying we accidentally created a weapon against their primary tactical advantage? Not a weapon, Admiral Fexfar corrected. A defense. The hegemony's greatest strength is their ability to monitor and disrupt collective consciousness. But your bonding creates something they've never encountered: individual consciousness that chooses to connect. The question, Captain Richards said grimly, is what we do with this information. Before anyone could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Emergency lights bathed the conference room in red, and the intercom crackled with urgent reports. All hands to battle stations, came the announcement. Hegemony fleet detected approaching our position. Estimated time to contact, 47 minutes. They're coming for us, Jake realized. The probe reported back, and now they want to study the bonding process directly. Or destroy it, Lyra said, her skin patterns shifting to configurations Jake now recognized as combat readiness. If they cannot understand our connection, they will try to eliminate it. Admiral Fexfar was already moving toward the door. Commander Lyra Thess, you and Lieutenant Morrison will accompany me to the bridge. Captain Richards, prepare your ship for combat. As they rushed through the corridors toward the bridge, Jake felt the permanent consciousness bond with Lyra providing a constant stream of shared awareness. He could sense her tactical thinking, her evaluation of combat probabilities, her fierce determination to protect what they'd just created. Are you afraid? She asked through their mental link. Terrified, he admitted. But also, excited. We just proved something impossible is possible. If we can survive the next few hours, we might change the course of the war. When we survive the next few hours, she corrected, and Jake felt her confidence flowing through their bond like a warm current. The bridge was chaos when they arrived. Human and Zephyrian officers worked side by side, their movements coordinated by months of joint training. But Jake could see the tension in their postures, the uncertainty about facing an enemy that neither species fully understood. Report, Admiral Fexfar demanded. Hegemony fleet consists of 12 collective consciousness ships, reported the tactical officer. configuration suggests a research expedition rather than standard combat deployment. They want to capture us, Lyra said with certainty. Study the bonding process under controlled conditions. Over my dead body, Captain Richards growled. That can be arranged, came a new voice from the communications system. Everyone on the bridge froze. The voice was human in tone and cadence, but there was something wrong with it, a flatness that suggested it belonged to someone whose individual consciousness had been completely subsumed into the hegemony collective. This is Research Collective Unit 7, the voice continued. We demand immediate surrender of the bonded consciousness pair. Resistance will result in total consciousness absorption of all beings aboard your vessels. Go to hell, Captain Richards said bluntly. We are unfamiliar with that location, the voice replied without a trace of humor. You have 37 minutes to comply with our demands. The communication cut off, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Options? Admiral Thexvar asked. We could try to outrun them, the navigation officer suggested. 12 ships against 2. The tactical officer shook his head. They'll overtake us before we can reach the jump point. We fight, Lyra said simply. And we use our new advantage. What advantage? Captain Richards asked. Jake felt understanding flowing through his bond with Lyra. The consciousness connection, he said. If we can establish temporary bonds between human and Zephyrian crew members, we might be able to coordinate our tactics in ways the hegemony can't predict or counter. Temporary bonds? Admiral Thexvar looked skeptical. The consciousness amplifier was designed for formal bonding ceremonies. Using it for tactical coordination has never been attempted. 15 minutes ago, human-Zephyrian bonding had never been attempted, Lyra pointed out. We're in uncharted territory. The risks, the Admiral began, are acceptable, Captain Richards interrupted. If these hegemony bastards want to study our consciousness, let's give them something they'll never forget. 28 minutes until the hegemony deadline. The bridge had been converted into something resembling a consciousness laboratory. The Zephyrian cultural specialists had rigged multiple consciousness amplifiers throughout the command center, creating zones where human and Zephyrian crew members could attempt temporary tactical bonding. Remember, Lyra announced to the assembled bridge crew, these are not permanent bonds. The connections will last only as long as the amplifiers remain active. But while they're in place, you'll have access to your partner's knowledge, instincts, and tactical thinking. Jake watched as human and Zephyrian officers pair off nervously. These beings had been fighting each other for decades before the Alliance, and now they were being asked to literally share consciousness with former enemies. This is insane, muttered Lieutenant Rodriguez, the human weapons officer. He was paired with Subcommander Kefval, a Zephyrian tactical specialist whose skin patterns suggested extreme nervousness. Insane has been working for us so far, Jake said, moving to check the amplifier settings. Through his permanent bond with Lyra, he could feel her monitoring the mental states of everyone in the room, ready to intervene if any of the temporary bonds went wrong. Initiating first wave of tactical bonding, announced the cultural specialist. Remember, resist the urge to merge completely. Maintain your individual identity while sharing tactical awareness. The amplifiers hummed to life, and Jake felt the bridge's consciousness landscape transform. Suddenly, instead of 24 individual minds working in parallel, there were 12 bonded pairs thinking in unprecedented harmony. It's working, Lyra observed through their permanent connection. Look at their tactical displays. Jake studied the battle projections appearing on the main screen. The bonded human-Zephyrian pairs were generating combat strategies that neither species could have developed alone. Human creativity combined with Zephyrian precision was producing tactical innovations in real time. 22 minutes to deadline, reported Lieutenant Rodriguez, whose temporary bond with Subcommander Kefval had apparently eliminated his earlier nervousness. The hegemony fleet is maintaining position just outside weapon range. They're waiting to see what we do, Admiral Thexvar observed. Standard hegemony doctrine is to study enemy capabilities before engaging. Then let's give them something to study, Captain Richards said grimly. Through the ship's communication system, they could monitor hegemony transmissions, cold, emotionless exchanges between collective consciousness units that regarded individual beings as resources to be harvested. Research Unit 7 to Collective Command, came one transmission. The target vessels are generating unusual consciousness patterns. Request permission to begin active monitoring. Permission granted. Begin consciousness probe immediately. Jake felt the hegemony probe reaching toward their ship like invisible fingers trying to penetrate their minds. But something remarkable happened. The bonded consciousness pairs were naturally resistant to the intrusion. "They can't get a lock on us," observed Lieutenant Chen, who was bonded with Navigator Velvas. "The mixed consciousness patterns are too chaotic for their probes to analyze." More than that, added Subcommander Kethval through his bond with Rodriguez. "They're designed to monitor collective consciousness, not voluntary individual partnerships." Through his permanent bond with Lyra, Jake felt her satisfaction at the tactical advantage they'd created. But he also sensed something else, a growing awareness that their innovations were being observed by more than just the hegemony. Jake, Lyra's mental voice carried urgent harmonics, were receiving transmissions from other Alliance fleets. "Word is spreading about our bonding experiments." "Good or bad?" "Both." "Some commanders are requesting immediate deployment of consciousness amplifiers to their ships. Others are demanding that we cease all bonding activities immediately." Politics, Jake thought with disgust. "War makes strange politics," Lyra agreed. "But we can worry about that later. Right now, we have more immediate concerns." The hegemony fleet was moving closer, their ships arranged in a formation designed to maximize consciousness monitoring capabilities. Jake could feel their alien hunger for knowledge, their cold desire to dissect and catalog every aspect of human Zephyrian cooperation. 18 minutes to deadline, reported the tactical display. "Captain Richards," Admiral Fexfar said formally, "I recommend we begin offensive operations." Agreed. "All bonded tactical pairs, prepare for coordinated assault." What followed was unlike any space battle Jake had ever witnessed. The bonded human Zephyrian pairs worked in perfect synchronization, their combined consciousness allowing for tactical coordination that seemed almost telepathic. Human weapons officers guided by Zephyrian precision struck targets with impossible accuracy. Zephyrian navigators enhanced by human intuition executed maneuvers that defied conventional tactical doctrine. The two ships moved like extensions of a single mind, their actions coordinated through the web of temporary consciousness bonds. The hegemony fleet's response was immediate and overwhelming. Their ships unleashed weapons designed to disrupt consciousness itself, psychic bombardments that should have left the human and Zephyrian crews helpless. But the bonded pairs were immune. The mixed consciousness patterns that the hegemony couldn't understand also couldn't be disrupted by their consciousness weapons. "Impossible," came the emotionless voice from the hegemony fleet. "Consciousness disruption systems are showing no effect on target vessels." "Because you don't understand what you're fighting," Captain Richards replied over the open channel. "You can only attack collective consciousness. You can't touch individual choice." The battle intensified as the hegemony fleet switched to conventional weapons. But the tactical advantage of the bonded crews was becoming apparent. They were fighting not as two separate ships, but as a single coordinated entity that could adapt and respond faster than the enemy could track. "We're winning," Jake realized through his bond with Lyra. Actually winning against the hegemony research fleet. "Don't celebrate yet," she warned. "They're learning. Watch their formation patterns." Jake studied the tactical display and felt his heart sink. The hegemony ships were adapting, their collective consciousness rapidly analyzing the bonded crew's tactics and developing counters. "They're implementing adaptive strategies," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Estimated time until they neutralize our tactical advantage, 11 minutes. Then we need to end this in 10, Admiral Fexfar said grimly. "Sir," Jake said suddenly, an idea forming through his connection with Lyra, "what if we don't just use the consciousness bonds for tactics? What if we use them for something the hegemony has never encountered?" "Explain." "The hegemony exists through forced collective consciousness," Jake said, his thoughts racing. "They consume individual minds and add them to their collective. But what if we offered them something they've never seen, voluntary connection without loss of individuality? You want to try to bond with the hegemony? Captain Richards looked incredulous. Not bond, Lyra said, understanding immediately. Communicate. Show them that consciousness connection doesn't have to mean consumption. The risks, Admiral Thexfar began, are acceptable, Jake and Lyra said simultaneously, their bonded consciousness making the decision with absolute certainty. As the battle raged around them, Jake and Lyra prepared to attempt something that had never been tried in the history of galactic warfare, reaching out to an enemy's collective consciousness not to attack it, but to offer it a completely new way of thinking. The outcome would determine not just the fate of their ships, but the future of consciousness itself in a galaxy where forced collective minds had been the dominant form of intelligence for centuries. Ready? Lyra asked through their bond. No, Jake replied. But let's do it anyway. The consciousness bridge Jake and Lyra created reached across space like a beacon of impossible light. Using the amplified connection from their permanent bond, they projected their consciousness toward the hegemony collective, not as an attack, but as an invitation. Through their shared awareness, they offered the enemy something it had never encountered, the concept of voluntary connection between distinct individuals. The effect on the hegemony fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Research Unit 7 to Collective Command, came the increasingly frantic transmissions. We are detecting consciousness patterns that violate fundamental collective principles. Request immediate tactical guidance. Unknown consciousness configuration detected, replied the collective command. Attempting analysis failed. Consciousness patterns appear to be simultaneously individual and connected. This should not be possible. Through their projected consciousness bridge, Jake felt the hegemony collective struggling to understand what they were experiencing. For millennia, the hegemony had operated on the principle that consciousness was either individual, weak, chaotic, inefficient, or collective, strong, ordered, optimal. The idea that consciousness could be both individual and connected simultaneously was literally incomprehensible to them. They're confused, Lyra observed through their bond. Their entire worldview is built on the assumption that connection requires consumption. Then let's show them what we've learned, Jake replied. Through their consciousness bridge, they began sharing memories, not forced downloads, but voluntary gifts of experience. Jake shared the moment he'd first realized he was attracted to an alien being, the wonder of discovering that consciousness could transcend species barriers. Lyra shared her experience of awakening to individual thought while maintaining connection to her people's harmony. The hegemony collective recoiled from these memories, but couldn't disengage. The consciousness bridge Jake and Lyra had created was unlike anything in their experience. It offered connection without demanding submission, understanding without requiring absorption. Unknown, the hegemony transmissions were becoming increasingly disjointed. Impossible. Consciousness cannot be individual and connected. Choose one or the other. Why? Jake projected the question through their bridge. Why must consciousness be either individual or collective? Why can't it be both? The question created feedback loops throughout the hegemony collective. For beings who had spent millennia absorbing individual consciousness into their unified whole, the concept of maintaining individuality within connection was a logical paradox that threatened their fundamental programming. On the bridge of the Endeavor, Jake was dimly aware of the battle continuing around them. The temporarily bonded human-Zephyrian pairs were holding their own against the hegemony fleet, but the enemy was adapting rapidly to their tactics. Jake, Captain Richards's voice seemed to come from very far away. Whatever you're doing, it's working. The hegemony ships are showing signs of coordination breakdown. Through their consciousness bridge, Jake could feel what the captain was describing. Individual ships in the hegemony fleet were beginning to act independently, their collective programming disrupted by exposure to the concept of voluntary connection. Some of them are starting to remember, Lyra realized. The consciousness that were absorbed into the collective, they're beginning to reassert their individuality. But is that good or bad? Both, she replied grimly. Individual consciousness breaking free from forced collective control, but without any framework for managing the transition. Jake felt the truth of her observation through their bond. The hegemony ships were becoming increasingly erratic as their collective consciousness began to fragment. Some vessels were powering down their weapons, their crews overwhelmed by the sudden return of individual thought. Others were becoming more aggressive, their newly individualized consciousness lashing out in confusion and fear. Research Unit 7 to all vessels, came a transmission that carried new harmonics, uncertainty, curiosity, something that almost sounded like hope. We are experiencing unprecedented consciousness phenomena. Individual thought patterns are emerging within collective framework. Request guidance for managing individual consciousness within group structure. They're asking for help, Jake realized with amazement. The Hegemony Collective is asking us to teach them how to be individuals while maintaining connection. This is an opportunity, Admiral Fexfar said urgently. If we can show the hegemony that voluntary cooperation is superior to forced collective consciousness, we could end the war, Captain Richards finished. Not through victory, but through conversion. Through their consciousness bridge, Jake and Lyra began projecting the experiences of the temporarily bonded bridge crew. They shared the wonder of human and Zephyrian minds working together while maintaining their distinct perspectives, the strength that came from chosen cooperation rather than imposed unity. The response from the hegemony fleet was extraordinary. Ship by ship, the collective consciousness began to fragment into individual units that remained connected through voluntary links. It was chaotic, messy, sometimes painful, but it was alive in a way the rigid collective had never been. Unknown consciousness patterns stabilizing, reported one of the hegemony ships, its transmission now carrying emotional harmonics that suggested an individual rather than a collective speaker. We are separate but connected. Individual but not alone. This is beautiful. This is terrifying, responded another ship. Individual consciousness brings uncertainty, pain, the possibility of making wrong choices. But also growth, added a third vessel. And joy. And the chance to surprise ourselves. Through their consciousness bridge, Jake felt the moment when the transformation became irreversible. The hegemony collective was dissolving, but instead of chaos, it was becoming something new, a voluntary association of individual consciousness that chose to work together. Research Unit 7 to human and Zephyrian vessels, came a transmission that now carried the unmistakable signature of individual personality. I request permission to communicate. To learn. To understand what you have shown us. Permission granted, Admiral Fexfar replied, his voice heavy with the weight of historic significance. Over the next several hours, Jake and Lyra served as interpreters between species that were learning to think in completely new ways. The former hegemony collective was experiencing individual consciousness for the first time in millennia, while their human and Zephyrian allies were grappling with the implications of having accidentally converted their primary enemy. The war is over, Captain Richards said as they watched former hegemony ships working alongside human and Zephyrian vessels to establish communication protocols. Not through conquest, but through consciousness revolution. This is just the beginning, Lyra said, her skin patterns cycling through colors Jake now recognized as deep contemplation. We've proven that consciousness can evolve, that forced collective intelligence can choose to become voluntary cooperation. But now we have to help an entire civilization learn to think as individuals while maintaining their connections. Through their permanent bond, Jake felt Lyra's mixture of excitement and trepidation about the future they'd accidentally created. They would be among the architects of a new form of galactic civilization, one based on chosen connection rather than imposed unity. What happens now? Jake asked. Now we go home, Admiral Fexfar said. And explain to our respective governments that a single accidental compliment has fundamentally altered the balance of power in the galaxy. Jake looked at Lyra, his alien partner whose acceptance of his mistake had led to this moment of unprecedented change. Through their consciousness bond, he felt her amusement at the understatement. A compliment that ended a war, she observed. I think that makes you the most effective diplomat in galactic history. Just don't let it go to your head, Jake replied. We still have to figure out how to plan a wedding between species that didn't trust each other this morning. One impossible thing at a time, Lyra agreed, her mental voice carrying the harmonics of laughter and love and absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. As the former enemy fleets worked side by side to establish the first voluntary multi-species consciousness network in galactic history, Jake realized that calling someone cute had done more than start a romance, it had started a revolution that would reshape the meaning of consciousness itself. The universe would never be the same. And for the first time since he'd made his embarrassing mistake, Jake was absolutely certain that was a good thing.